Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Future Ready Leadership. My guest today, Rob Kowalski, the Chief People and Organization Officer at Novartis, aka CHRO. Rob, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Jacob. Great to be here.
Yeah, likewise. So we got connected, obviously, because I reached out to you to interview you for the book, and you just joined our Future Work Leaders CHRO group. So welcome. We're excited to have you there too.
Thanks.
And today we're going to be talking about this idea of human-centered experiences, which I think is a really, really important topic, especially in today's world. Before we dive deep into that, can you give people a little bit of background information about the company? I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the name. How many employees do you have? What do you guys do?
Yeah, sure. So Novartis is one of the oldest pharmaceutical companies in the world. We've been around for about 250 years.
Wow.
Started out on the banks of the Rhine River in Basel, Switzerland, still our global headquarters today, and where I'm talking to you from today. And today we're one of the leading global pharmaceutical companies in the world. We focus on areas of still the greatest unmet need: cardiovascular diseases, oncology, immunology, neurology, always trying to find new discoveries to make an impact of human health on the planet. And we have about 78,000 people, and we operate in just about every country in the world. So a truly global company with a truly global footprint. And from a people perspective, we have a very, very, very broad and diverse culture at Novartis, encompassing that amazing workforce and talent from all corners of the company of the world.
And how long have you been there?
So I've been here on and off for about 25 years. I've done two tours of duty, but I've been back now since 2009. But I'm a late bloomer CHRO. I've only been CHRO for 4 years, and but before that, I spent most of my career on the R&D side of our industry, specifically many years in regulatory affairs, working with the regulated industries, the FDA in the U.S. and other health authorities around the world. So
All the fun
that's
stuff.
all the fun stuff, really fun
Um,
stuff.
all right, so let's talk a little bit about what this idea of human-centered experiences means.
Yeah.
Especially now where we're having so much infusion of technology and AI. When you think about that, how do you define human-centered experiences?
Yeah, I mean, human-centered experience, the concept behind that, it really is what it sounds like. You can, at a simple level, if people might be more familiar with, in the IT world, you call it user experience, user
Hmm.
interface. Take that concept and translate it to humans. So what is it like? There's a big element of culture, but what is it like to be at Novartis? What is it like to work at Novartis? What is it like to feel Novartis? What is the experience you have when you come to work every single day? And it's everything from why am I here? What's my why? To what is the impact that I'm having on the company? To something as simple as how do I experience my fellow colleagues at Novartis every day? So truly that idea of the experiences that we offer, how do they speak to you as a human, and how does it feel to work here every single day?
So if we had to unpack that, because for a lot of people who are going to be listening and watching, they're going to be thinking, how do I create more human-centered experiences?
Yeah.
So you mentioned you've been there for around 3.5, 4 years. Is this a concept you introduced when you joined Novartis, where you decided we're going to look or revisit all of our people touch points and try to figure out how to make them more human?
Yeah, it's been a continuous journey, Jake. I mean, as a company, we started pretty earnestly about 8 years to be very intentional about our culture, how we talk about it, what it means, how do you experience it. It really started back then, and even started back in 2008. We did almost a very bottom up experience where we had a kind of a change movement, if you will, within the company where we had a whole couple days, a whole couple of getting feedback from all over the company. And what does it feel to you? What do you want to change? What does it feel like to be here? And really almost start a movement within the company. And we got feedback and everything from let's change performance evaluations to what we'd like to see from our leaders to benefits, the whole thing. And it really began that movement where we started our very intentional culture and purpose behind our culture. So it's we've learned a lot. We've gone down some winding, twisting roads, as you would imagine, and now I think, even looking more towards the future, this idea of human-centered experience, it's getting a little bit easier to define. But I think even more so in a world that's increasingly shaped by algorithms and automation, that we believe that the future of work is not less human, but more. And so how do we now lean into that, leveraging our culture, leveraging,
Hmm.
what we've worked on, and trying to make that a bit more real. So
So let's dive a little bit deeper into that then. So
yeah.
when you say human-centered experiences, are there certain pillars that fall underneath that? So um, I don't know, is one of them, for example, total rewards. Another one is performance and feedback. Another one is leader. Like, did you divide it into different areas that you then need to revisit and try to make more human-centered?
Yeah, I mean, it starts very much, I think, at kind of the bigger framework. So, we started really first just defining our culture, and we
Okay.
have a culture. We call it a culture that's inspired, curious, unbossed, and then under each of those, what does that actually
Unbossed.
mean?
Okay, we're gonna get to the unbossed thing as well because I want to ask you
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah. We can get there, sure. But kind of underneath that, what does that all mean? And then how do you apply this in those different lenses? So, what does it mean to be a leader at Novartis? And we have a set of leader expectations where we can talk about what it means. We have a set of we call behaviors in action that try to translate that and make the culture discussable. And then underneath that are those experiences that matter. So, what is it like to make each other extraordinary? It's one of our behaviors in action. Let's talk about that. What does that mean? What does that mean to you? What does it mean to me? As a leader, how do you,
Hmm.
drive accountability in your team, or unbossed, if you want to call it that, and empower your people to do that? And so those experiences are part of the day-to-day interactions, but then they're also steeped in things that are a little bit deeper than that, of how do you talk about things, but it comes down to that center word of how do you experience things. So do you come to work every day and you feel like you've done something that's impactful? And I think, for a company like ours, the value proposition is perhaps easier than some, because we make an impact on human health. We cure sick people. We make diseases better. So there's a very inherent value proposition in working for a company that impacts human
Yeah.
health. Um, but you still have to feel every day that you're making an impact on that at the end of the day. And I'll tell you, Jacob, it's everything you know, from a pure functional perspective. How do you experience the HR systems, right? Is it easy to use? That's the true user experience. To, do I feel like I'm being treated like a human here every day? And
Yeah.
is the interaction I'm having with my colleagues something that's meaningful to me, for
Hmm.
example?
So if you had to have this as kind of like a framework, so it sounds like the top, and I don't know if you, when you were talking about this internally, if you had like a visual of how you kind of conveyed this, but to me it sounds like so you have the overarching, the values, those pillars that you talked about, the unbossed, curiosity, and I forgot what the third one was, and then it sounds like one layer
Inspiration. Yeah, yeah.
inspiration, yeah, and then it sounds like so one layer below that you have kind of what would you say, like leadership, behaviors, employee behaviors, and then one layer below that would be I guess, or no, maybe one layer below the top would be not the behaviors. That would be probably the bottom layer. The layer below that would be kind of the specific actions that you want people to
It's
take,
our,
and then
it's our
maybe
true, like our leader expectations, for example.
yeah. So is that kind of a way that you think? Because for people who are listening and watching that might be thinking about how do we revisit our practices, I'm always trying to give them kind of a framework or a visual that they can follow.
Yeah.
So if we were kind of coaching or consulting with some of the listeners and viewers, we would say, okay, first step is go through and kind of define what culture you want to have, talk to your employees, like get feedback from them. And so it sounds like you did that in terms of like pros and cons, like what are the pain points? Where is Novartis struggling from a human perspective? Where are we doing good? And you kind of took all that feedback. Then you devised what those values, those pillars are, and then one layer was those the actions you want people to take, and then behaviors. Is that kind of a fair
Yeah.
way
And
to?
yeah, and I can maybe just layer it for you. So if you
Yeah,
think
yeah, please.
about kind of the big framework, right? So the big framework we have is this culture that we literally defined as an inspired, curious, and unbossed culture, and a company like ours, of course, also that we have integrity in what we do, given how highly regulated we are. Um, that's kind of the framework, and we've learned over the years that that framework needs to be applicable to everybody. So it doesn't matter whether you're on the shop floor in Slovenia, or you're on the in the field force, selling products in Japan, and everything in between, or a researcher, sitting in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You need a
Yep.
framework that everybody understands. And then what we learned over the years is you have to make that framework discussable. So what does curious mean in Japan versus China versus the United States? What does unbossed mean in different cultural settings, for example? So talk about being unbossed in Japan. That's what do you mean unbossed in Japan? And so the next layer below that framework is are these tools to make it discussable. So first, what do we expect from our leaders in living this
Okay.
culture? And then, beyond the leaders, including them, is, how do you take this and put these into behaviors in action? And so we've actually defined in these behaviors in action what this all means.
Mm.
And what that essentially did, that layer below the framework, is it makes the culture discussable. And that we found was a bit of the magic and the unlock of
Yeah.
what you can do to make that culture. And I'll give you an example. We even designed a game that we just launched because we're still on the journey. We just launched a
Yeah.
game a couple of months ago called Imagine If. And it's literally a card deck of like 50 cards. And the card deck has little things like how has someone made you extraordinary? You can play these games with your teams. You can do them in the cafeteria. Like, so again, we keep trying to make the culture more and more discussable. And I would say 7 years in, we're still talking
Mm.
about it. We're still on the journey, and it still tells us that we're doing something right. And if you look at how much the world has changed since 2018, our culture really remains a source of strength and resilience. And I like to think shared impact of how we
Yeah.
actually do this all together.
So and I'm sure you hear this from peers, from competitors, from other CHROs. Everyone always talks about their culture. Oh yeah, our culture is what makes us
Yeah,
unique. Our culture this, our culture that, and sometimes I suppose that's true inside of organizations, and sometimes everyone just likes to say that's true,
yeah.
and nobody really knows what makes them unique. It sounds like for your company at least, you really are making it very purposeful and intentional. But can we break that down even further? So looking at like the leadership side, like what were some of those behaviors that you outlined or the actions that you identified that you wanted your leaders to take?
Yeah. So, I mean, our leadership expectations are pretty clear. We expect all of our leaders to lead and develop their people, full stop. We expect our leaders to navigate complexity. We have our business is very, very complex, whether you're
Yeah.
developing new medicines or selling into very complex healthcare markets. So, how do our leaders navigate complexity? And the third is, how do you help your team and the organization deliver collective impact?
Okay.
So very, very, and underneath that we have a bit more words of what does it mean, and we talk about these things. But the way we've rolled these out, it wasn't a bunch of slide decks and presentations. We had leaders talking about how they live those things. How do
Mm.
they lead and develop people? How do they navigate complexity? How do they deliver collective impact? We even had our top 100 meeting just a couple weeks ago. We spent 6 hours on this in
Wow.
workshops talking about it, years later. And so, we're very clear and purposeful about it. And I'll give you an example of, two of our behaviors. We have 5 behaviors in action. As you can imagine, we had tons of debate. Is it 3? Is it 4? Is it 5? Is it 6? And the number doesn't matter. I think it's what they are and how you talk about them is what really matters. And so, one of our behaviors in action is we create positive change for patients.
And this
So
is specifically for leaders or across the board?
now this is now across the board.
Okay,
This is
across the board.
across
Okay.
for every person who works at Novartis. One of our
Okay.
behaviors in action is create positive change for patients. So, is the work you're working on going to make a difference to patients? Keeping that patient in the back of your mind when you're doing the work. If you're solving a complex problem, what would a patient want you to do? This idea of understanding, what matters to patients and make the choices that focus on what would matter to them. So
What if
it's a
somebody
bit of
says,
yeah.
what if somebody says like, I'm in marketing, I'm in HR, I don't have any contact with a patient, I'm not on that front line at all. I'm, in engineering, I'm coding, developing customer experience.
Yeah.
But like, how do you connect that to people who don't have direct line of sight to the customer?
Sure, it's more connectable than you would imagine. We actually, interestingly, none of us touch patients or impact patients directly. It's
Yeah.
all indirect in our industry, right? Because we're not on the front line with them. But think about it from an HR perspective. How if one of our roles is to find and nurture great talent, we have impact by finding and recruiting and nurturing the scientist who's going to discover the next molecule that's going to impact cancer or a neurological disease. And so you can apply it that way. Maybe you are the person the famous NASA story where they asked the janitor, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm sending someone to the moon."
Yep. I
Well, the
love that
same thing
story.
is true here. It doesn't matter who you are. All the work you do is in service of, delivering, finding, discovering, or getting a new medicine to patients. Some of our most passionate people, one of the areas that we're in is radioligand therapy, where we deliver radioactive pharmaceuticals to patients with prostate cancer. And, the people who are working in those production facilities, every single vial that they ship, they pack with pride because they know within 48 or 72 hours, there is a patient who you're going to make an impact on their life. And so you can really very much draw that very direct relationship to patients, even though
Yeah.
we don't see patients ourselves. You can apply it everywhere. So,
Do you do that through storytelling? Do you do that through, because obviously it's one thing like if I'm packing those drugs to like think that, and maybe I will think that and maybe I won't think that.
yeah.
But it's another thing if the organization's teaching and conveying, hey, just so you know, like this is where this is going, this is the impact that it's going to have, this is what it's doing. So is there a lot of storytelling and giving employees insight, regardless of the role that they're in, on how they're impacting patients and customers?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it up. And it's a wonderful segue back to human-centered experience as well. We do a lot of storytelling. And I one of the things I try to impart to our leaders all the time is if you want to be an impactful leader, is tell the stories. Tell the stories
Yeah.
of how you made a difference, or tell the stories of how that product made a difference. We bring patients in all the time and have
Oh, you do.
patients, yeah, talk to folks in large town halls and small settings, so they can actually see the impact. And we've
Mm.
had patients every time they come in, I cry, right, because they sit on stage and say, "You changed my life. I couldn't do X and now I can do Y," and it is incredibly impactful. And so this idea of storytelling is incredibly powerful and meaningful. And we talk about human-centered experience. When you come to work or you go home and you tell your family, what did I do today? I actually was part of getting an amazing new therapy approved, or reaching someone in the commercial space that I couldn't do before. And so those stories are incredibly powerful to bring it back to the why are we here every single
Mm.
day. We have some people, they're here because they might have had a loved one who they lost to cancer, for example, and so they're incredibly passionate working in the field of oncology. Or we have someone who may have a loved one or someone at home that has a terrible neurological disease, and they have a mission in their own personal life to be able to make an impact on that going forward. And so people bring all sorts of stories every day, and we always encourage them to share those stories and talk about them because they're incredibly impactful.
Yeah, that storytelling piece is really important. So, do you do this? So obviously, you bring in, you said patients. What else do you do? So, let's say, I don't know, I'm in sales or HR. Um, are the stories conveyed by email? Do you have, I don't know, like pictures of patients on the walls? Is it during team meetings, town halls? Like, how do you bring some of these things to life if it's besides just having some of these patients come visit? Because obviously, you have a massive company,
Sure.
almost 80,000 employees around the world. Um, So, what are some of the strategies you use for that storytelling?
Yeah, and I would say the answers are yes, yes, and yes to all the examples you gave. It's never one thing, and I think that kind of goes
It's
back to
everywhere.
the diversity of our culture. What something means in one part of the company is meaningful there, may not be as meaningful in another part of the company. And so we see examples of it in many different spaces. In one of our manufacturing sites, where we make a very, very highly technical therapy called CAR T therapy, you literally make the product for an individual patient. There's a little light on the wall that we turn on for each patient for their medicine that goes out the door. And so you literally can look at the wall and look at the thousands of lights that have been turned on for that specific patient, for example. Um,
Wow.
and
That's
uh,
pretty
and yeah,
cool.
of course, we bring patients in for town halls, but we also have people tell their own patient stories. We have many Novartians who are patients, and they tell their story. And we've created, a safe enough culture where people are quite comfortable sharing their own personal
Yeah.
stories. So that's all meaningful. And I always try to find a way to share with our leaders, to have our leaders turn those stories into action, turn those stories into something that's impactful to continue their team to do their best and to do more,
Hmm.
and to empower them to be able to be their best selves at work every day.
What about people who say, well, Rob, that's easy for you. You work at a pharmaceutical company. It's very clear the impact that you're having. I work at a marketing agency, or I work,
Yeah,
at Coca-Cola, or I work, someplace where, I'm not making life saving or life changing
yeah.
medicine. How do I get that same level of connection and storytelling or purpose if I'm not doing what you're doing?
Yeah, we have a campaign that we call "What's My Why," um, which loosely translated is "Why am I here?" Why do I come to work every single day? And yeah, there's a lot of people that the story is about a patient or a family member or a loved one. We have people who have other whys. I can talk to a finance person who does our some of our deals, and they're like, "I love doing deals, man. I love doing like whatever your why is. You need to talk
The
about
negotiating, the
what is
dealing,
your
that,
why? Yeah,
yeah.
of course. And so, yeah, you can go to Coca-Cola, talk to Lisa and her team. Like, why are you at Coca-Cola? What are you doing? And I think it's great to ask people, why are you here, and what is motivating them. And
Hmm.
I would hope at most companies, people are there for a reason. If you're at Marriott in the tourism industry, why are you there? Because I want to, provide great experiences for people and make them happy. What is the why of why you're doing something?
What comes first? Is it the why before you take a job and work for a company, or is it taking a job for a company and finding your why? Because for a lot of people, and I'm sure you probably experienced this at Novartis, maybe they're newer grads, or maybe they're coming from a totally different industry and they just need a job at some point. And, I would imagine there are sometimes people come to Novartis and they're say, I want to work on these life-saving drugs. I have family or I've experienced this. And so I want, that's why I want to be there. And there are probably other people who maybe show up and they say, well, I need a job, but maybe through the course of that job, they then discover their why. So how do what's first, the why or the job? Because some people maybe they don't know
Yeah.
what the why is.
Yeah, yeah. I think the answer is it's both, right? But because you're right, people will come here because they're absolutely dedicated to working in the healthcare industry, in our industry, for example. But yeah, you have other people who I'm a marketing person. I want to market. So what a great opportunity to market. I look at the next step to that question though, which is why do they stay? and
Yeah,
and
maybe that's a
you
better
know,
thing.
so
Yeah,
you might come in with different reasons, but why do they stay at your company? Why do they stay in their team? Why do they stay in their department? And maybe we now take that back and look at leaders. Why do people stay? Most people stay or leave because of their manager, right? I think there's lots of data that shows the number one reason people will leave a company. It's usually not pay. It's usually because of their immediate environment or the culture that
yeah.
they're working in. So, we're happy to take anybody who wants to come to Novartis. But the question I have once you're in is why do you stay? And what motivates you to stay? And how do we create that human centered experience that you have lots of reasons why you want to stay and continue to contribute to this company versus another company or another industry for that matter?
Is it a challenge if people don't have the why, or they've been there for a while and you have a conversation with them and you say, why are you here? And they're kind of just like, I don't know. It's a job, it's a paycheck. Because I'm sure there are plenty of people out there like that. Um, is that a bad thing if somebody just says, "Hey, I'm here for a paycheck because I need the money to provide for my family and
Yeah.
stuff like that," or
Yeah.
do you find that it's always important to connect it back to something that's related to the company?
I think it's an incredibly personal question to answer. Um,
Yeah,
and I'll give you an example. We actually kicked off a new program today, literally 3 hours ago, that we're calling Future Me, which is really, your own personal development. And the
interesting.
focus of the program is not around what is my next job, which people always ask, or what do I
Yes.
want to do in 5 years. The focus
Yep.
is what is my journey and how am I growing or what am I doing? And so I think, yeah, we need people who just want to come to work every day, do their job and go home, of course.
Like
But
that's okay. That's
but they're
okay.
still there there's still a reason why they're there, and there's still a reason on what their own personal growth journey is. I have yet to meet a person who doesn't want to grow. The question is, what does growth mean for that person, right?
Yes.
And so I think we turn that discussion more and more into how are you growing every day. Before this role, I was in my last role for 11 years, which is a
Wow.
really, really, really long time. But I tell folks all the time, I still grew in that role every single day. And often my growth didn't come from the core part of the job, it was the stuff around the job. Maybe I got involved in an employee resource group, I raised my hand and volunteered for a special project, or so my philosophy and our philosophy is that, as long as you find yourself growing, you can be in any role. You can be in a role for 10 years and it's fine as long
Yeah.
as you find that you're growing. And so I think I have yet to meet a person who doesn't want to somehow grow, professionally. It doesn't mean you want to be the CEO or the head of R&D, but everybody wants to grow and evolve.
That's
And so that's the conversations we're trying to have with people.
That's one of my 8 laws of employee experience for the new book, which I haven't really talked much about yet because we're still getting it up on Amazon and getting all the marketing behind it. But that's one of the 8 laws of employee experience I have is grow or go.
Yeah,
And and I always think about growth as kind of a new form of job security, where if you give employees the opportunity to grow within your company, and it doesn't have to mean that they're necessarily getting promoted,
sure, exactly.
job title, but you're learning new things, you feel like you're developing and things of that nature. Um, if you have all those opportunities, why would you want to leave? Right. I
Yeah,
mean, I get it. Company says, oh, come over here. We'll give you like a 50% salary increase. Yeah, those things happen. I understand. Um, but if you compare just kind of, equal opportunities in one organization, you feel like you have unlimited growth potential and you can learn and move around from place to place. And why would you want to leave?
yeah.
Right.
Well,
Unless, like I said, salary or life circumstances happen.
yeah, but
Um,
but I think you also have to have the honest conversations. I've had several conversations in the last, I would even just say year, with people who have just said, I don't feel like I'm growing here. I don't see where I can grow. We talk about opportunities, and it's not bad if over time you don't feel you can grow in a particular company. And so I've
yeah.
said to these people, go home over the weekend, talk to your family, spend some time on this. Maybe this isn't the right place for you. And these are like really good people. Um, and they've come back and they're like, yeah, I think you're right. I think I have to go try something else. And I'm fully supportive of that. You should have those discussions with people
That's
as
very
well.
interesting
You know,
because
you
most
know,
people would say, "Oh my God, if they're good people, you should never say that. Like, get them to stay here. What should we do? What can I give you? I'll give you a salary increase. Whatever you want." Your approach is very counterintuitive. So talk a little bit about that. So why do you do that? And when somebody says, "I don't have an opportunity to grow," I mean, is that really the case? Like they've just reached a place where I don't know, there's nowhere for them to move in the company. They're just stuck. I suppose that does happen.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and of course, you don't take any of those conversations lightly ever. I
Yeah,
think,
especially if it's a good somebody you want to keep.
yeah, and the role I always try to play is to help them discover, what are they really looking for.
Yeah.
And if it's something we can offer, then of course we usually will do whatever we can, to try to help them find it. But honestly, sometimes, maybe they've been here for 20 years, maybe they tried a bunch of things, maybe they don't know what they want. And I've also seen that happen. And I think it's better to have that honest conversation than to have someone who's, half-heartedly here.
Mm.
Um, and when they do make the decision to say, okay, maybe I have to grow outside, one of the last things I always say is, well, don't forget to come back in 3 or 4 years, because just because they walk out the door doesn't mean they also can't come back. And so I think it really does come down to, we always want people to grow. I started my career at one of the predecessor companies of Novartis, Sandoz, way back then, and I left after about a decade, because I felt I wasn't growing at the time. I went out, got some fantastic opportunities, and a call
Mm.
came and said, "Rob, do you want to come back?" I came back in 2 seconds, because I left for myself. I didn't leave because I didn't like the company. I came back because I loved the company. And so I
Mm.
think that's a normal part of personal
Yeah.
growth. And I think part of our role as leaders is to help people that they're always growing. You always, of course, try to do that internally, but once in a while, it just doesn't work
So
anymore. You know?
I guess for you, and I'm curious to hear your experience because that's one of the reasons you left. So when you left because you didn't feel there was an opportunity to grow, was it seniority for you? Was it you weren't learning anything else? Was it like what? Because I would imagine a lot of people can relate to the experience that you had. What was it that made you feel that you're kind of like, there's nowhere for me to grow? I'm either doing this forever or I have to go look for something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. I've always left or moved or tried something new for growth opportunities. It's never been about money.
Yeah.
And the people that ever do leave for money, I always say, "Oh, are you really sure? Like, Sometimes it's real, as you said, you have these extreme cases. Fine.
Yeah, like look what's going on with the AI
Yeah,
land grab,
yeah,
right? Meta's saying,
exactly.
"Hey, do you want to come here for $100 million?" I'm like, for $100 million, we
Yeah,
can have a
I'll go
conversation.
anywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
we can talk about
But
that.
look, I think I've always personally tried to make sure that I was always growing, and anytime I've made a big move, whether it's internally or externally, it was always for the growth opportunity, not for the title. I'm a
Yeah.
firm believer, and I can give you my personal story. I can give you 20 other personal stories. I know the people that focus on their growth actually are the ones who really succeed and continue to do well. And chasing the title, I think rarely works out well if there isn't a lot of good personal growth behind that. And I think the title and the jobs come when you grow. The job that I'm currently in, this was not on my career path,
Hmm.
but I'd
Didn't,
always
didn't want
leaned
to be
into
CHRO, huh?
yeah, no, I mean, but I've always leaned into growing around leadership and developing people and the things that are core to this job. So when the opportunity came up, I was ready for this role.
Yeah.
I needed to learn a few things, of course, but I was ready for the role because I had developed myself into, a really, really strong people leader. So,
How do you balance growth and patience, though? Because there are certain situations, and I've heard lots of stories from other CHROs where they might have an employee, and it's typically a Gen Z employee who will go in, they'll take a training program, and they'll say, well, I completed this training program and in a week or so, ready for promotion,
mhm.
right? So how do you balance people who come to you and say, hey, I'm ready, I want to grow, I want something next, I want promotion, I want, this and that, with the idea of patience, right? I mean, I understand you want growth, but you have to give it time. And then you have to have a conversation, well, how much time? Well, when can I grow? When can I get promoted? So how do you balance those two things of growth with patience? Because it seems like you need both. For example, I'm teaching my daughter chess, and she plays in a lot of tournaments. She's 9 years old, and there was a while where she was stuck at a certain rating, and she was stuck at like a 500 rating, and then she went down a little bit, she went up a little bit, and she was stuck there for many months, from the majority of this year. And then recently, she played a tournament a couple of days ago. She got first place. She got 5 out of 5, and she jumped 300 rating points. And now she's
Wow.
rated 800. And and I always see that in parallel to business and leadership and careers, because when you're in that 500 range, it's frustrating, and you have to put the time and the effort. And it's one thing for her to take lessons and to learn things online. It's another thing for her to prove it in a tournament to actually win.
Sure. Yeah.
So you have to be patient, but when you're patient and that opportunity comes along and you do well, like amazing things can happen. So talk to me a little bit about the idea of balancing growth with patience, and how should we have those conversations with employees?
Yeah, I was I mentioned a little while ago this our new Future Me program, and maybe that's one of the ways. Not maybe it's one of the ways we're trying to actually address that. In that this idea of achievement is not vertical, and I think more and more it will be less and less vertical, and that it's the horizontal growth that is the areas where people grow the most. And you can look at what will the future of AI or automating the transactional work become. I think it makes the horizontal opportunities perhaps even flatter and flatter. And so how then do you keep growing? And this idea, I'm moving away from talking about career ladders to career lattices, because the
Yep.
growth is this way, right? And where
It's
I've
like a
seen
rock
people grow the
a rock
most.
climbing wall, or
Yeah,
something you got to go down and to the side. Yeah.
you eventually get to the top, right? But it's the and where I've seen in my career people that grow the most, it's the people who've made the lateral moves. Maybe I
Yeah.
work in a specific therapeutic area, and do I grow more from having the same job with a new therapeutic area, or do I grow more because I went out into a region and I'm now managing 25 countries? It's the latter where you're going to grow more, right? Even if it's a lateral move to do that, because you're learning different skills. And so even in the younger generation, I do lots of mentoring, and I do check-in sessions with folks, and we actually talk about this. And that's why
Interesting.
our new growth platform is really talking about the career journey and not the career ladder, where we try to have intentional discussions. Now, we do have some markets where we have a couple extra rungs on the ladder in between the bigger rungs that the rest of the world has, because that's how you have to play in that local market, right? Or
Yeah.
you're totally competitive. But that's a totally different scenario than what you're talking about. You have to do that to compete, but it's still about the personal growth. It's still not climbing the ladder. you know.
Yeah, 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 and that makes sense, right? I mean, sometimes you have to do what you have to do, and in a certain market and a geography, if that's what people respond to and they appreciate, then that's what you got to do. So we kind of went down this path because you were talking about one of the leadership behaviors, and you were talking about, oh, you were going to share like three of them. Can you share maybe one more leadership behavior as well? And then I'd love to talk a little bit about this idea of unbossed and what that means.
Yeah, sure. So my favorite one is that we make each other extraordinary.
Yeah,
So we played
big
around.
word.
Yeah, I mean, if you sit and just think about it, we make each other extraordinary. You kind of go like, wow, like how do I make someone extraordinary? How does someone make me extraordinary? It's a very, very powerful word. And the idea behind that is how can we be generous with each other and nurture each other along the way so that we acknowledge people's strengths, but at the same time we want to help them collectively grow. And so for a while we played around with we want to have a high support, high challenge culture. um, we support each other, but we should still challenge each other. Sometimes at Novartis we're really nice to each other.
Yeah,
We don't challenge each other. And we found that those words somehow started getting moved sideways. We would have people say, well, I want to have high challenge and high support. Like, okay, that's a different message. Like, so we were trying to find a way that we actually could curate that to the same general concept of being supportive and challenging each other, but change the words. So it makes you
mm,
be much more thoughtful about how you engage along that journey. So you make each
yeah,
other extraordinary by helping them grow, by supporting them. It's all those sorts of things. And so we talked about how do we roll this out. When we get our leaders to stand up and talk about it, we don't say, here's the slide, here's a bullet, memorize it. We say, this is how I help make people extraordinary, or this is how someone's helped make me extraordinary. And so, again, it allows the discussion of the concept through examples, storytelling, as we were talking about earlier. And then people start to go, I see that. I've been there before. Oh,
mm,
someone's given me tough feedback. I've taken that before. I've grown from that. So that's the idea. So
okay, okay. Let's talk a little bit about this idea of unbossed.
yeah,
Because when people hear that, I think the first thing that comes to mind is, Novartis doesn't have any managers. There's no leaders there.
yeah, of
Everyone's kind
course.
of
Yeah,
doing their own thing. What does unbossed mean?
yeah. At a very simple way to look at it, it's we expect our leaders to drive an empowered and accountable organization. And of course, yes, when it was first rolled out, we had the extreme of people saying, "Oh, I have no boss anymore, and I can do whatever I want." We had to drive that conversation back towards the center. But the idea was that we wanted to be able to drive accountability and empowerment into the organization. And not every decision has to go to the boss. And the boss should hold their teams accountable and empower them. And they should. So it's about this two way discussion. Now that doesn't mean you don't have governance. That doesn't mean you don't have the right systems in place to manage important decisions or big decisions. But at least on the day-to-day stuff, like let your team do their work because they know their work
Yeah,
better than everybody. And so again, coming back to our behaviors and action, and our leader expectations, we've taken that and applied words that make that concept. We still have an unbossed culture, but we've now taken words to make that concept more discussable. So, deliver collective impact with your team. There's an element of unbossed in there. Lead your people, develop your people. There's an element of unbossed in there. Um, the idea of holding each other accountable for what we're doing is also part of that. And so
yeah.
it's the think of the umbrella that we talked about. It's the framework that's the common thing, but then below that, how do you talk about it and make it real?
Well, so that's also interesting because there's a lot of research and data out there. I think a recent one was in the Financial Times. I think that's where I read it, where 50% of Gen Z employees don't want to be mid-level managers, and like 70% of them said it's just high stress, low reward.
Yeah,
A lot of people say they're not prepared. A lot of people say that they're just overwhelmed with stuff. And so I think a part of it is because, to your earlier point, everyone views the mid-level leader as I need to get them to approve everything and anything, and you become the bottleneck. And nobody wants to be the bottleneck.
yeah,
So I think one way to solve that problem where you encourage more people to get into that mid-level leadership role is to say, hey, we're going to create more accountability and responsibility. You don't need to be the bottleneck. You can actually focus on the leading, the coaching, the mentoring, the strategic decision making.
Yeah,
Let people do their job. So that's kind of, it sounds like what the unbossed idea means is
exactly.
be an adult, take care of things yourself. You don't need to go to your direct supervisor to get approval for anything and everything.
Yeah, that was exactly the sentiment,
Yeah.
and how do you apply that? And we've tried to also pull that in. We spend a lot of both time and money investing in our leaders. We have an entry level fundamental manager program that we have. We have our first time manager program. We have a leader of leaders program. First time you're a leader of leaders, and all of those are quite intentional programs focused on some of the stuff that you were just talking about, of how do you actually do that in practice? What do we expect of you? How do you do it? Let's talk about it. Let's give you 25 examples of how everyone else struggles with the same thing you're going to struggle with. I'll never forget, once I had a kind of a newly appointed manager who was a fantastic technical expert, but he got a team for the first time. It's a small team, like 6 people, and he was a very thoughtful person, someone I respect. And he comes to me and he goes, Rob, he goes, I gotta tell you, he goes, do you know how hard it is to be a manager? These people take your time and you have to nurture them and help them. And I literally started laughing, like, yeah, it's really hard. It's a lot of work. Um, and I tell people all the time, look, if you want to lead people, I think, don't forget, Novartis pays you to be a leader, not just to do your
Yeah.
job. And 30% of what you do should be leading your people and your teams. It's part of your job. It's not an afterthought. It's part of the job. So we talk about that with our people. So,
Yeah. I think sometimes there's and I was talking about this yesterday with somebody else on my podcast where I think sometimes people assume that the more senior you become in a company, the easier it is for you. Like, "Oh, I'm going to work less and get paid more and just kind of chill out." But I think the reality is that the more senior you become in a company, the more effort, the more time, the more resources, the more work that like it's actually harder, not easier when you get into a leadership role.
yeah,
Because now you're not just responsible for yourself and the things that you need to do, but you're responsible for other people. And managing emotions and managing the psychology of a team and dealing with people's frustrations and dealing with people's highs and like it's tough. I mean, in some way, it can be challenging to not get overburdened by the feelings and emotions and discussions that you have with so many other people on your team. And it's like, to your point, it's not for everybody. Not everybody's able to be a leader. So how do you have those conversations too? Because sometimes there are people who want that role,
yeah,
but you just know that it's not for them. And maybe they're really good individual contributors, but they lack I don't know, the emotional component. Like, you can just tell that they would either get overworked or overburdened, or they would snap at people because of their temperament. Have there been situations like that where people have come to you and they're really good at their job, but you have to have a tough conversation and just say, honestly, I don't think leadership is for you?
yeah. I've personally had those conversations with a couple people, and I also kind of field and coach people who have to have those conversations with people.
Yeah, I would imagine
And
that's a tough conversation to have.
yeah, and I've seen it. But we also, there are some spots, especially on the more technical side of things, some of the science tracks or
Yeah.
technical expert tracks, where that individual, yeah, you're right, they're not a good people manager, nor do they want to be. And usually when you have that discussion, they're like, oh, thank God, like I really didn't like that, and I want to just be whatever. I'm a scientist, I'm a developer, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we actually have gone as far as, we have certain areas where we have very, very senior technical expert tracks, which are on par with the senior manager tracks from a compensation perspective and that sort of thing. Just recognizing that sometimes you just need the most senior technical expert to be the most senior technical expert, and pay them and acknowledge them from a reward perspective as you would a senior manager. So you have to look at your business, and sometimes you still need those individual contributors to be great individual contributors, even though they might be very, very senior in the organization. So,
Mm, yeah. Yeah, again, not easy conversations to have, but sometimes
oh,
I think they're important to have. So we only have a few minutes left. I wanted to touch on the metrics piece. The how do you measure some of this stuff? How do you measure human-centered experiences? How do you measure some of these behaviors and values that you talk about for leaders? How do you measure unbossed and growth? How do you, well, I guess two questions. One, you as the CHRO, what are you looking at? And then for people out there who are not CHROs, but they're leaders of teams, what should they be looking at? And do you have a dashboard? Do you look at it every day? Walk us through kind of how you know you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. I wish there was a simple answer to that one, Jacob, right? And I think anybody who figures that out, please reach out to me after you watch this podcast, because I think it's really hard to do. I mean, we do some of I think the more obvious things. There are,
Yeah.
um, leadership 360 type metrics that we certainly do to assess our leaders. What does their team think of them? We have a tool that we use on team effectiveness, which is
Okay.
how does your team work together? What are your differences? How does that happen? Um, we do assess people on our leadership expectations and performance reviews. What have you done to grow your team this year? Harder to quantify, still a little bit subjective, but we have those discussions. Every single one of our leaders has a development objective to develop their people. And so it's something that we actually expect them to do and to every single year. Now, what do you measure? All you can do is, you can take a look and say, have you had a development discussion with every one of your employees documented in the system, for example?
Yeah.
And so there are ways to do those things. I would love, and I hope the future allows it, that you're able to actually get to a place where you could, give a leader some sort of a more objective score of
Hmm.
the what they can do as a leader and the impact that they're having. Now, I think it's really hard to do because you can have a leader that has fantastic scores because they're all friends with their team, but their performance isn't good from an impact on the company perspective. And you can have a leader that has bad scores because they're a change agent and they're making a huge impact, and their team is, coming along with them. And so it's still an area that is really hard, I think, to assess despite the tools that exist. So then it comes
Yeah, it's
back
really.
to, yeah, go ahead, yeah, please, yeah,
I was gonna say it's really hard. It's almost like trying to measure your spouse or your kids and give them a score,
yeah.
right?
Good
Like
luck, good luck with that.
exactly. But it's one of those things where if my kids are doing something that I know they shouldn't be doing, I can have a conversation with them about that.
Yeah,
But it's hard to give an objective score about that.
yeah,
So, for example, for my younger son who's 5, we're working on things like being more confident, complaining less, taking more accountability, helping, clean up after yourself. And it's one of those things where I know when he's doing it and when he's not as the parent, like I can feel it and I can see it and I can experience it. But if I had to give him a score, how do you do that?
yeah,
How do you give somebody a score on these kind of human metrics? I mean, you can give a score, you can make one up, but it's really hard to know if the score aligns with reality. Like, I mean, how empathetic is somebody? How great of a communicator are you on a scale of 1 to 10? How good are you at making people extraordinary? Like, how do you answer that question and put like an 8 or a 9? I don't know.
yeah,
But I know if you were to ask me, "Hey, does Rob make you feel extraordinary?" You can have a conversation about it, and through um the qualitative discussion, you can get to some sort of a rationale. But putting a score is really hard.
yeah. I
So,
agree.
so that's why I'm really curious how you and other CHROs out there are trying to measure and evaluate some of these things because I don't know, it seems pretty hard.
Yeah, I think it is. You can quantify where you can. You can look, for example, but let me bring back full circle. Maybe let's start there. That it all comes back to this human-centered experience. And I think as a leader, what do you do for your teams? So I'm a leader of leaders. How do I assess my leaders of their teams? It is collecting data. It's watching them in action. It's encouraging them to see if they pick up the cues that you give them to help them grow. It is analyzing data. I mean, we do regular employee type surveys,
Yeah.
and those sorts of things, and you can mine for feedback and sensing in that data. We're trying to do more and more sensing in the data, and I think some of the newer tools that we have, like we're about to launch an enterprise wide AI coach, um,
Mm.
that. not as a manager will I be able to see what the discussion is with the AI coach, but I'm hopeful that the AI coach will help them. If you're a leader and you ask the AI tool 5 times, I'm going to have a difficult conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
After 5 times, the AI tool will come back and say, "You've asked me this question 5 times, Rod. Maybe you're the one that has a problem with difficult conversation." So I think all you can do is try to interject all of these different tools. And more important than anything is that we talk about it, Jacob. And that's why more and more the idea that we continue to interact as humans. I don't believe for a second AI is going to replace humans. Um, that more you have to talk about these things all the time. You have to have honest discussions about them. You have to ask questions. We have to challenge each other. We have to support each other in those moments. And I think that's how you chip away at it until the day when someone comes up with this magic composite score that says you're an 86 out of 100. Congratulations.
Yeah.
I'm
Good
waiting
luck
for
with that
that.
one.
I don't know if I'll ever see that, but in
But
the
you did
meantime,
mention something
you
interesting,
got to
which is
talk
the
about it.
importance of
Yeah,
observing.
yeah,
And I think maybe sometimes too many leaders and too many people inside of organizations are forgetting about the observing, and they're just looking at the quantitative engagement scores or the leadership assessment, and they're looking for the numbers. But the observation, I think, is even more important. The qualitative is more important than the quantitative because that's
yeah.
kind of where you see and get everything.
And let me give
Um,
you an example. Like I was talking to someone today who they've been quite a change agent as a leader in a really tough space where we need them to make a big impact. And their kind of employee scores are not great, which in the beginning is fine, but now we're 18 to 24 months in.
yeah,
And I had a discussion with them today, and I said, I don't think that score determines anything, but your scores haven't moved up in 18 to 24 months. Let's have a discussion of why you think that is. And we had a very real discussion. And their feedback was kind of like, well, because they don't understand me and they don't want to move forward. I'm like, oh wait, let's stop for a minute and talk about that. And so the scores maybe help you have the conversation, as opposed to the scores are the answer instead of the conversation. We
yeah.
use those as tools. And so, that person's walking away with some, I think, interesting feedback today saying maybe you're not listening to your team. So,
Yeah, no, and I like that way to think about that as the data is a way to have the conversation. It shouldn't be how did you phrase it? The data should be a way to have the conversation. The data should not be
the answer instead of the
the answer.
conversation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. And that's, I suppose, a core part of the human experience, right? Human-centered
exactly.
experience is
Exactly.
um, data and AI and all these things. AI tools are great, but we still need to remember that fundamentally the business is about people and human beings and all that sort of stuff in there, which is, again, the theme of human-centered experiences.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Rob, thank you so much for your time. Where can people go to learn more about you? Anything that you want to mention? I don't know if you're active on social like LinkedIn, or if you want to plug your career page. Anything you want to mention?
Yeah, please follow me on LinkedIn. We do all follow me, follow Novartis. We often talk about our culture and the Novartis experience, both on my page and the corporate page. So would love to have you follow me and love to engage with you directly there as well. So really appreciate it. Jacob,
Sounds good.
thanks for the chat. Really, really appreciate it. Always enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you for taking time out of your day. And thanks everyone for tuning in. I will see all of you next week. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Future Ready Leadership. If you want to get access to more content on how you can become future ready, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter. It's thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And if you enjoyed this episode, please send it to somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. Thanks for listening or watching, and I will see you next time.